Today we talk about King Henry VIII, and no matter what your opinion of the guy is, if you can turn an entire country Protestant simply to divorce your own wife, then that's a pretty big power play right there. Hello! Welcome to Brainspill, the laziest show on the internet. My name is Tank, and yes, today we're talking about King Henry VIII, the person that I'm fairly sure every single British child in school learnt at one point. And we are basically doing a horrible histories and spending an entire episode talking about the life of Henry VIII, because why the hell not? It's an interesting topic and many people die, so it's always a fantastically entertaining topic to talk about. Yes, you know the man, the person that had 6 wives, who is pretty notorious for what happened to many of them, but we are getting ahead of ourselves there. I still actually remember the rhyme. Divorced, beheaded, died. Divorced, beheaded, survived. But we will get into full detail with that. For now, we talk about the rise and fall of King Henry VIII. Born on the 28th of June 1491, Henry Tudor was the 3rd child and 2nd son of King Henry VII and Elizabeth of York. In 1493, at the age of 2, Henry was appointed Constable of Dover Castle and Lord Warden of Cinque Ports. He was subsequently appointed Earl Marshal of England and Lord Lieutenant of Ireland at age 3 and was the Knight of Bath soon afterwards. This child was more accomplished than I was at the age of 3 than I am at the ripe old age I'm at now, which was certainly more than 3. I mean, yes, the monarchical power and wealth was probably one thing, but there we are. The records of Henry's younger life isn't really that well documented, mainly due to the fact that, given his line of succession to the throne, he was never actually expected to become King of England. However, he was being given a wide array of learning in other fields, such as different languages, instruments, sports, and even a career with the church. Our man was getting a fully rounded top-tier education at the time. Henry's older brother, Arthur, Prince of Wales, married Catherine of Aragon, less so out of passion but more so out of being married off by his father, Henry VII, to establish an alliance between England and Spain at the time. Politics at the time, all about marrying off your offspring to some other random king or queen's offspring at some other part in the world. All we get now are just people getting married off to C-list Hollywood actors, but there we are. In 1502, Arthur died at the age of 15, possibly due to sweating sickness, just 20 weeks after his marriage to Catherine. The idea was floated for Henry VIII to be the next in line to the throne and to effectively marry her instead, which, weirdly enough, everyone was just kinda cool with. You know, being the widow of your own brother, the brother that's just died, pretty strange, and I don't blame Henry, because I think he thought it was pretty strange too. At the time, he had simply no interest in marrying Catherine. This was probably due to the fact that Henry was age 10 at the time, and he was probably more interested in catching Pokemon than he was anything else. Catherine was left in limbo for some time and was pretty much put on the back burner due to the fact that Henry had expressed a disinterest in Catherine. She pretty much stayed in England but was more so under the role of an ambassador. Being a devout woman, she chose to believe that it was God's will that she would marry the prince despite his opposition. Very clingy. His father at the time, Henry VII, died on the 21st of April 1509, to which his son, Henry VIII, succeeded him at the ripe old age of 17, to which he immediately decided that marrying Catherine would be a swell idea. Henry married Catherine of Aragon in June 1509, which, whilst again all seemed a little strange, he wasn't a kid anymore. He was a full-blown king, charming and all, and with his rounded education, people just liked the guy. Which is very different from perhaps what people think of him today as, but back in the heyday, he was a very attractive man. Or so people tell me. Whilst he gallivanted off to France to fight, his wife, Catherine, birthed their first child called Mary. Whilst this sounds like fantastic news for any parents, Henry more so wanted an heir to the throne than anything else. Particularly, he wanted a son, and Mary certainly doesn't sound like a boy's name to me. So, she's gonna have to try a bit harder next time, clearly. Whilst most parents may be disappointed that they don't get the gender they want, some people decide to take more unexpected action over the fact that your wife didn't give you a son. Although he probably already had one, but not with Catherine, due to the fact that he was also apparently using the maids as a bit of a side piece whilst everything was going on. The 1500s were just a different time, man. However, as time went on and the fact that Catherine didn't give him an heir, his eyes started to wander and his love for her began to dwindle and fade. And it just so happened that the relationship between England and Spain was also starting to dwindle and fade at this point. So the two things that he wanted, an alliance with Spain and an heir to the throne, he was getting neither of these things. So the real need for Catherine didn't really seem there anymore. So his eyes began to wander and he set his sights for a member of the Queen's consort named Anne Boleyn, a 25-year-old smoking hot woman. However, she wanted to be queen, not so much just a side piece like many of the other maids or consorts had been previously. So they needed to put some plans in place to make this all reality. How do you get rid of Catherine and then bring Anne into the picture? Well, it could be just so simple that you just lop her head off, but we're getting ahead of ourselves here. The idea was that a trial would be held to be argued the fact that Henry had married his brother's widow and was not given the heir as needed, using a Bible verse in Leviticus to support his position. The Pope, however, became aware of his intentions to seek marriage with Anne Boleyn and simply refused to grant his blessing for the divorce to occur. What a cockblock. Henry, the man that had supported Catholicism pretty much his whole life. I mean, the man grew up and was potentially going to be running a career in the church. And now, this one thing that he'd held dear for most of his life was stopping him from divorcing his old wife and marrying their new one. So what do you do in that situation? I mean, you could think of some interesting workarounds and try and make things work. But then you just remember that you're the King of England and you can do whatever the hell you want. So, here we go. So, with Henry being seemingly less interested in the church, he decided to remove the Pope's influence over the Church of England, therefore removing Catherine and divorced her. Then he sought to be with his new Protestant wife, Anne Boleyn. As the new head of the English Church, he began to assert himself as the new central power. Heads were about to roll. It was around this time where Henry started to indulge himself in the finer things in life. Whilst beforehand being a very athletic person, he decided to eat a lot more than perhaps he did in the past. And due to the fact that he'd quite recently had an injury whilst horse jousting, he couldn't really do much of that anymore either, meaning that he spent most of his day sat around being a gluttonous pig, eating everything he could. Some historians even recorded that he ate about 5,000 calories a day, which is insane. I mean, I know that you're the king and all, but you've still got to put up a fairly decent image, or basically every single picture of you is going to be some big massive fat bloke that everybody remembers you for, but again, we're getting ahead of ourselves. Whilst Henry in his youth was a young, attractive and fit man, things changed quite quickly, particularly at this point in his life. During this time, Anne had been married to Henry for about 3 years, and had been pregnant 4 times, and, well, believe it or not, she also didn't give him an heir to the throne. She was only able to give him one healthy child, a young girl which of course wouldn't be in line to be king. The signs were there when one of the king's new mistresses, Jane Seymour, was moved into the quarters. However, things escalated when 5 men, including Anne herself, were arrested on charges of treasonable adultery. With the Queen, I should add. Although the evidence against them was unconvincing, you've got to remember that Henry is the king after all, and pretty much what he says goes, and well, they were found guilty and sentenced to death. Alongside their marriage being annulled on the same day, at 8 AM on the 18th of May 1536, Anne was executed on Tower Green. Just to show proof in the pudding for his lady-in-waiting, literally the day after Anne's execution, Henry got married to his 3rd wife, Jane Seymour. Because of course he did. And yes, despite all of this, after everything, Henry had finally got his wish. On the 12th of October, 1537, he'd got himself his own heir to the throne. Jane gave birth to a son, Prince Edward. However, complications in the birth resulted in Jane's death soon after, with jubileous celebrations soon turning to mourning. And yes, this was sad. It's a very sad occasion when the woman that gave you a child passes away. So very sad indeed. Anyway, Almost like a Tinder notification, measures were immediately put in place to find another wife for Henry, to which his aide Thomas Cromwell had lined up his future wife in the name of Anne of Cleves. The decision was made after a portrait was painted of his new wife and was shown to Henry, in which she looked beautiful. So of course, like any bachelor would, he immediately said yes. However, when she arrived in England, Henry was less than impressed. More so, he felt that he'd probably been catfished and that the picture was too good to be true because she apparently looked nothing like she did in the picture. So, yeah, catfishing isn't just a recent thing, people. Less than pleased with what had happened, Henry accused Thomas of treason and, for his royal cock-up, was put to death. Henry never consummated the marriage and ended the marriage simply 6 months later, to which the fifth wife was then lined up, Catherine Howard, on the 28th of July 1540, which, just for good measure, was also the same day that Thomas Cromwell was executed. This time, however, Henry was happy with his new queen and that she apparently didn't look like roadkill. Soon after the marriage, however, Queen Catherine had an affair with a courtier and cousin, Thomas Culpeper. Henry, upon discovering this, did what he did best, and, well, at this point, do I really need to spell out for you? Beheaded in 1542. His last wife and sixth wife, Catherine Parr, was right on cue. Catherine married Edward in July 1543, and you might have expected her head to get cut off as well for some unknown reason, but, surprisingly enough, that didn't happen. As a matter of fact, she was a very caring wife and actually cared for Henry in his later years. Despite the fact that they had some largely different theological beliefs, they basically stayed together until Henry's death. She cared for Henry in the later years of his life, to which he would eventually die on the 28th of January 1547. He died aged 55. His obesity likely hastened his death and resulted in his reign coming to an end. Royalty comes and goes, kings and queens of the past move on, and new people come to take their place. That's the natural order of royal things. But I think out of anybody in history, there's nobody quite like Henry VIII. He's quite notorious for all the reasons we've just talked about, and I think if you're going to say that anybody was the definition of a king, I think we've got it right here. I mean, he might have had something to do with the fact that he basically killed a bunch of his wives, but there we are. King Henry VIII, the Chad King himself. If you guys like that video, here's another one just like it. I'll see you guys in the next video. Fantastic.